Good morning. The Planet Forward Summit will begin in 5 minutes. The Planet Forward Summit will begin in 3 minutes. Please take your seats. Our program will begin in 1 minute. Now, please welcome your host, Executive Director of GW's Alliance for a Sustainable Future and Planet Forward Founding Director, Frank Sesno.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Let's do that again. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Much better. Welcome back. I thought yesterday was an amazing day. What did you think? I really have a couple of special shout outs. One to our partner Adobe for the incredible swag you have the opportunity to earn if you haven't done so already by doing a few things like following us on social media. So do that and get some swag. See the QR codes at registration and over at the Student Center, where our workshops will be starting at 10:30 sharp. So when Bill is done here, get right across the street. The workshops are going to be fantastic. I will see you at several of them, actually. One of the other great things you can do is to earn this T-shirt, if you haven't done it already, designed by the one and only Gwen McElry, and she happened to be a student of mine, so I'm a little biased on that. And other swag, like the hats. Right? I'm just modeling the hat here. I will not model the T-shirt for you right now. Okay, now for what you've been waiting for. Bill McKibben, unbelievable author, journalist, activist, friend. His 1989 book, End of Nature, regarded as the first book for a general audience about climate change. He's authored 20 of them, more on the way. His work appears regularly all over the place. He helped found 350.org. If you don't know it, go there. First global grassroots climate campaign. It's organized protests on every continent, including Antarctica. He's the founder of Third Act. He and I had a conversation around Third Act and Planet Forward last year on intergenerational storytelling. And he's all about, Third Act is organizing people over the age of 60 on behalf of climate activism and justice. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Bill McKibben.
Thank you, brother. Woo. I'm glad I got the cap. Very, very good to see you all. And what a pleasure for me to be here. Probably more of a pleasure for me than for you. I feel very much like the odd person out at this gathering. I'm old and you are young. In fact, I spend all my time now organizing other old people like me at Third Act, which maybe I'll talk about in a little while. You all have been deep into conflict resolution and transformation and things. Basically, I just cause conflict wherever I go. And y'all are telling beautiful and amazing stories about possibilities. I do some of that, and I'll tell you about what I'm working on now, which I think kind of fits. But at some other level, I'm the most depressing person you'll ever meet. I wrote the first book about all of this, and it had the cheerful title, The End of Nature, okay? And really my job for my whole life has been sort of to bum people out. And I'm going to do that for a few minutes here as we begin, because there's no use trying to talk about what we're going to do unless we understand kind of where we are. We won't get the scale and the pace of the solutions that we need correctly unless we understand the scale and the pace of the crisis that we're facing. So you're going to have to bear with me for 6 or 7 minutes. Well, boy, that light really is bright. I'm putting this back on. You're going to have to bear with me for 6 or 7 minutes as we go through the valley before we emerge. First thing to be said right now, 2025, is that the long, slow ramp in temperature on this planet in the last 40 years is, over the last 24 months, spiking dramatically in really, really, really scary ways. This has been scary from the outset, as we've learned about the danger to the climate system, but it's gotten exponentially more frightening in the last 2 years because the temperature is going places that we've never seen before. Beginning in January of 2023, I started getting calls from oceanographer friends of mine saying, pay attention to what's happening with the temperature of the sea. By June, we were setting all-time records. We've never measured sea temperatures as high off the Florida Keys. They were 101 day after day, which is the place where you set your hot tub to, you know. That heat had moved over land by June of 2023. The hottest days in the year are always around the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere because there's more land mass up here to hold heat. And we can now take a daily temperature reading of the planet. We've got enough satellites and buoys and weather stations. And so when we reached the solstice in 2023 in June, scientists were saying, these are the hottest days we've ever measured on the planet, and by a considerable margin. The measurements only go back, at best, a couple of hundred years, but scientists are good at building proxy records out of ocean cores and glacial sediments and things. And they were saying these were the hottest days in at least the last 125,000 years. 125,000 years, just for context, is about the point when anthropologists think that people started etching symbols onto bone. So nothing that we would really recognize as a human culture or civilization has ever existed on a planet as hot as this. Pretty much every month since June of 2023 has broken the record for the hottest, May or September on record. We got the numbers for March yesterday, and it narrowly edged out 2024 as the hottest March that we've ever had. And with all of that have come the things that scientists have told us would come with it. Not just, though I don't mean to minimize them in any way, the ongoing saga of fire and flood, which is terrible. I mean, my small town in Vermont's been cut off from the world the last 2 summers by flooding for long periods of time. My boyhood home, place of my first memories in Altadena, California, burned to the ground on day 2 of the big fires. But bad as those things are, the really scary stuff is what's happening to the underlying systems on this earth. The jet stream, whose dynamics depend on the temperature differential between the equator and the poles, is now fluctuating erratically and getting stuck in remarkable ways because that temperature differential is no longer so great as we've melted the Arctic Ocean. The Gulf Stream, the Atlantic overturning currents, which in volume are 100 times the size of the Amazon River, the biggest terrestrial river we have, they're clearly beginning to flicker and falter as fresh water pours off a melting Greenland ice sheet, and because it's a different density than the saline water of the ocean, it interferes with the overturning currents that drive these. What I'm trying to tell you is the biggest things on the planet are now beginning to crack. And the time in which we have to deal with this, and this is important to just bear in mind because it sets limits on what makes sense as a response and what doesn't. The time that we have to deal with it is very short. This is a time test. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change told us a couple of years ago that if we had any hope of staying on the sort of pathway that we laid out in Paris, that we'd need to cut emissions in half on this planet by about 2030, which by my watch is 4 years and 8 months distant, which is not a lot of time. It wouldn't be a lot of time even if everybody was working in good faith, but everybody isn't working in good faith. So let me just for a minute talk about the elephant in the room here in DC, which is that all of a sudden we have the richest and most powerful country on earth run by people who not only keep insisting that climate change is a hoax, but are acting as if they can not only completely ignore it, but accelerate it. In the last few weeks, we've managed to shut down much of the scientific enterprise that has allowed us to understand what's happening. I was on the NOAA website yesterday, and you can no longer get the up-to-date map of temperature buoys. It's been taken down. So if this happened now, we, in essence, wouldn't know about it. We're blinding ourselves to what's going on, even as we do exactly the things that scientists have told us not to. The spectacle of the President of the United States insisting that the way forward was mining coal in 2025 is one of those spectacles that historians will shake their heads at. Especially since in Britain, the place where we invented setting coal on fire to power things, they managed last November to shut down the last remaining coal-fired power plant in the UK. We're alone in this, and we are quickly ceding this most important of questions to the rest of the world, particularly the Chinese, who are happy to provide technology and increasingly leadership in the ways that we're going to deal with it. And the utter shame of it all is really profound. The Trump administration pulled funding from Princeton last week for climate research, and the official letter from the Department of Commerce said the reason that they were doing it was that the findings that Princeton scientists were coming up with, that the Earth was heating, were causing climate anxiety in American youth, which, if you think about it, at some level is true. If we didn't know about any of this, then perhaps we wouldn't be as anxious, but we would just drive blindly off the cliff towards which we're now heading. So that's the bad news, and it is pretty comprehensive bad news. We are in a terrible fix, and at least in this country, we're at the moment doing what we can to make that fix worse, not better. I'm not sure that there's really a analog for that in our history or anybody else's. And that we're doing it is particularly poignant because, of course, America has put far more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere than any other country. No one, including the Chinese, will ever catch up with us. It's all still out there. The stuff that came out of the tailpipe of my family's maroon Plymouth Fury in the early 1970s when I was getting my learner's permit in the suburbs of Boston, it's all still up there in the atmosphere trapping heat. And the unfairness of that is part of this question. The entire continent of Africa has put about 3% of all the greenhouse gases that are in the atmosphere. The US, 3% of the world's population, has put 25% of those greenhouse gases up there. Africa is being hit harder than any other continent. I mean, I talk about the flooding in my home state of Vermont, and it's tragic and tough. But when the floods in Vermont ended in 2023, almost the next day, record-breaking rains began in North Africa. And before they were done, the biggest river in Libya had smashed through 2 dams and into a coastal city where it washed 10,000 people out to sea, where they drowned in the course of an hour. We didn't hear much about it because there's not a lot of cameras and reporters and things in Libya, but that's the sort of thing that now happens with great regularity around the world. This is not only the biggest practical challenge that we have ever faced, it's the greatest moral challenge that we've ever faced. We've done a lot of bad things over the years in colonialism and imperialism and on, but we've never figured out how to actually fundamentally make it impossible for people to physically live in the places where they were born. And that's what's happening now. Every 1/10 of a degree Celsius that we raise the temperature moves another 100 million of our brothers and sisters out of a sustainable climate niche. And the UN estimates that on current track, we'll see somewhere between 1 and 3 billion humans on the move in the course of this century, because it'll be too hot or their community will be underwater or whatever. All right. I'll take a breath, you take a breath. And now let's talk about what we're going to do about it. Because there, in fact, despite everything, there is good news, and there's better news than we've really had any time in the 40 years that we've been working on this. The problem of climate change is not difficult to understand. Virtually all of it, 80% or more, is caused by the combustion of fossil fuels, by burning coal and oil and gas. So the solution to it, obviously, is to stop burning coal and oil and gas. The problem with stopping burning those things is that they undergird the economy at the moment. They produce the life that we all understand as modern life. And so for many years, it's been difficult for people to imagine. It's been easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of burning fossil fuel. But we're past that now. And we're past that because scientists and engineers have really done their job. 1954, at Bell Labs in New Jersey, funded by millions of Americans making phone calls, Bell Labs scientists produced the first workable solar cell. And sometime in the last 3 or 4 years, we passed the point where generating electricity from those solar cells became the cheapest form of power on Earth, with wind directly behind it. We now live on a planet, 70 years after the invention of that solar cell, where the cheapest way to make power on our Earth is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That's a remarkable, epic moment in human history. It offers the possibility for change at least as big and deep as the changes that came with the Industrial Revolution. And in many ways in the other direction. Not just giving us the hope that we might someday slow the rise of temperature because we'd be burning, we could stop the burning of fossil fuel, but also liberating us from the fact that at the moment we depend on a fuel source that only exists in a few scattered places, and hence the people who control those few scattered deposits become way more powerful and wealthy than they should be, and are able to use that to wreck the world in which we live, whether they're the King of Saudi Arabia or Vladimir Putin in Russia or the Koch brothers in America, our biggest oil and gas barons who've used their winnings to systematically degrade our democracy for decades. Instead, we could rely on the power of the wind and the sun, which are diffuse but ubiquitous, available absolutely everywhere. And we're beginning to see what that looks like in places that have actually done the work to make this transformation. So in our country, California has done more than anybody else. California has put up a lot of solar panels and a lot of wind turbines, and most crucially in the last couple of years, a lot of batteries, big grid-scale batteries up to store that sunshine and let us use it in the evening. And the result's been quite remarkable. Beginning last year and accelerating in 2025, day after day after day, California has been producing for long stretches of each day more than 100% of the power that it consumes from renewable, from sun and wind and hydro. And that means that at night, when the sun goes down, the batteries that have been collecting that excess all afternoon routinely now become the biggest source of supply to the grid. What does that mean? That means that California, 5th largest economy in the world, is using at the moment 44% less natural gas to produce electricity than it did in 2023. Okay? So in 2 years, we've seen decline of almost half in the amount of natural gas used to generate electricity in the world's biggest economy. That is the single most hopeful statistic that I have heard in the 40 years that I've been at work on this issue. Okay? It's not confined to California. Texas has been putting up clean energy faster than California, although at the moment the legislature is doing its best to put an end to that. We shall see. but it's not confined by any means to the United States. In fact, in many ways, we're outliers here. China is in the process of becoming the world's first, not petrostate, but electrostate. They're putting up about 2/3 of all the clean energy that's happening in the world, and the scale of it is truly remarkable to see. So big a scale that it's now leaking over into the rest of the world. Last year in Pakistan, which has a long border with China, there's so many excess solar panels. They're so cheap in China that people were beginning to export them in large numbers. And so traders who had been bringing rice or cement or whatever from China were bringing in lots of solar panels to Pakistan. We know about this, or we knew about it at first, because in January of last year, people started reporting that the demand for electricity on the Pakistani national grid was dropping, and it had dropped something like 10%. That never happens. The demand for energy on this planet just goes up and up and up, especially in fast developing poor nations like Pakistan. They couldn't figure out what was happening until people started looking at Google Earth. And they could see on rooftops across Lahore and Karachi and Islamabad, solar panels just going up everywhere. Factory tops, shops, homes. Farmers, those of you who've traveled in rural Asia, know that the kind of soundtrack for that part of the world is the boom of diesel generators running the irrigation pumps for the deep tube wells that irrigate the Punjab and the Sindh and on and on and on. That's expensive, that diesel for irrigation. So farmers were the earliest adopters of these solar panels. Most of them lacked the money to actually build the steel supports to put the panels on. They're just laying them on the ground, pointing them at the sun. Pakistani demand for diesel fuel dropped 35% last year. Okay? We're seeing the same thing start to happen across Africa, especially southern Africa. Any place where there are good Chinese trade routes, these solar panels are flooding in. And Pakistanis, though, just to give you a sense of the scale, Pakistan last year, Pakistanis put up the equivalent of 50% of the existing national electric grid in solar panels. In countries across southern Africa, those numbers are about 15 or 20% in the last year. So the pace and scale of this is pretty remarkable. It's not yet fast enough. The IEA, the International Energy Administration, says that we need to increase by about 50% the rate at which we're putting up renewable energy if we're going to get on that sort of Paris pathway. That's hard, 50%, but it's not like an impossible number, some incomprehensible change that we'd have to make. We just have to do what we're doing, a lot more of it, as fast as we can. That'll be hard, especially here, because, and I'm sorry to be brutally cynical here, but because the people who were paying attention to those numbers were the fossil fuel industry. They knew very good and well what was happening to how much gas they were selling in California, and they started panicking. And that's why they poured unprecedented amounts of money into the last election, and that's why they're getting their reward now, everything that they could ask for. We're at the moment trading exemptions from tariffs for the willingness of other countries to buy American liquefied natural gas in huge. We're not confining the damage to our own country. We're spreading it lots and lots of places. So what I'm telling you is that there is a titanic fight underway. And the outcome of that fight and how fast that fight gets settled will determine what the temperature of the planet turns out to be. We're not going to stop global warming. It is way too late for that. We may, emphasis on may, still be able to stop it short of the place where it cuts civilizations off at the knees, but only if we move with extraordinary speed. So the question becomes what we can do to accelerate this thing. And here's where I'm going to move from reporter mode into the sort of other work that I've spent the last couple of decades doing, which is more in the line of activism. It's not my natural instinct. You can tell from listening to me that I'm not a great orator. I'm a writer. That's what that's what I know how to do. That's what I was trained to do. I enjoy being with you, but left to my own devices, I'd rather be home typing, But at some point, it became clear to me that merely producing more information about all of this was not going to turn the tide. I wrote The End of Nature, the first book about climate change, when I was 27, I guess. And I think then I really believed that our job was to win the argument. And so we produced more books and papers and seminars and on and on and on. And we won the argument. By the mid-1990s, there was no doubt in the scientific community about exactly what was happening. And it hasn't wavered, changed in any significant way since. We won the argument. We were just losing the fight, because the fight wasn't about data and reason and evidence. The fight was about what fights are usually about: money and power. And the other side of this, the fossil fuel industry, has so much money and so much power that they were able to figure out how to keep their business model going, even when it became clear that it was ruining the earth. So, in the absence of billions of dollars, the only currency to work in is sort of the currency of movements, of getting people together to get things done. And that depends on the ability to tell stories, to build narratives, or better yet, a narrative or a couple of narratives that are able to get enough people embarked in the same mission that you can counter somehow that enormous power that money produces. So that's what we've been working on one way or another. With 7 students at Middlebury, we started this thing called 350.org, and 350.org now produce, last count, I think about 20,000 demonstrations on this planet in every country except North Korea, and led the fossil fuel divestment campaign, which is now at about $40 trillion in endowments and portfolios that have divested from fossil fuel and all of that. So it's helped, but obviously not helped enough, because everything's still getting hotter. The best thing that it did probably was produce a whole new generation of young activists, people who'd fought those divestment campaigns on campuses and things, and they emerged to found the Sunrise Movement. And they told the story around the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal, that story was powerful enough that it, by the time it got through the congressional sausage-making machinery, it had become the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. Far from a perfect piece of legislation, but the first important thing that the U.S. has ever done to try and address the climate crisis. And you can tell that it was a useful thing because the Trump administration is busily trying to destroy it at the moment. But all of that activism, or most of it, has come in a period when fossil fuel was cheap and renewable energy was expensive. And so the job had to be to try and make fossil fuel more expensive, to put carbon taxes on, or slow down the industry in some other way, whatever, in order to. Now we're in a different environment, okay? Now we're in a place where the cheap stuff is the clean stuff. And that's a huge advantage. But if we're going to do it in time, 40 years from now, we're going to run the planet on sun and wind because it's essentially free. But if it takes us anything like 40 years to get there, then the planet we run on sun and wind will be a broken planet. So our job is to accelerate it. And that depends above all, I think, on telling powerful stories like the ones that I was telling you about California or Pakistan to illustrate what the possibilities are. We've got lodged in our minds the idea that clean energy is alternative energy, okay? that it's the Whole Foods of energy, if you will, nice but pricey, all right? It is actually the Costco of energy. It is cheap, it is available in bulk, it is on the shelf ready to go. That message, if we can get it across, will be extraordinarily useful in setting the political framework that will make it more and more possible to change the laws. We're not going to change anything in DC in the next couple of years, that's clear. But we can change the laws in state and city after state and city to make it far, far easier to put this stuff on your roof, to make it far, far easier for utilities to connect up existing, on and on and on. We can do that work, but only if we build momentum. And that, at some level, is a process of telling stories. So I'm going to tell you just for a moment about this project that we're at work on that we want to, it actually gets officially launched in 10 days' time. But I'm going to tell you, and you can tell other people if you want. You all know about Earth Day. We're on the 55th anniversary of Earth Day. Earth Day, the first one in 1970, was a very good thing. 20 million Americans went into the street, 10% of the then population. That was enough to change the zeitgeist sufficiently that a corrupt Republican administration, in this case Richard Nixon's, had no choice but to do the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, set up the EPA, everything that they're now trying to, this corrupt Republican administration is trying to ruin. So Earth Day was great. What we're going to try and do is Sun Day. And it's going to happen at the equinox in September, okay? And if it goes well, it'll be an extraordinary celebration of the possibilities and an extraordinary kind of marker for what we can do going forward. So I've told you, renewable energy is surging, but not surging enough. We need to be going about 50% faster. So we need people. These are a couple of pictures from the first Earth Day back in 1970, just to remind you of the scale. That's Fifth Avenue in New York. But again, 20 million Americans were out in the street. Biggest demonstration in American history. So now we're going to try and, will not be that big, but we will do what we can to get a lot of people engaged in this work. Part of that's going to involve telling all the stories that I've been telling. And those stories are powerful. And I think they're likely to hit home because actually this is one of these places where ideological barriers are much smaller than they are in other places. Actually, conflict transformation is kind of possible here because the polling shows that across the ideological spectrum, people like clean energy. Republicans don't like it quite as much as they used to because there's been this very concerted campaign with the president telling people that wind turbines cause cancer or whatever it is. But they still like it in very large numbers. Conservatives and liberals may appreciate it for different reasons. I think often when I talk with conservative friends, the idea that they have their own power supply on their own roof and never have to interact with anyone ever again. Their home is truly their castle and they can defend it with their AR-15 and whatever. That's whatever. And all the liberals are like, oh, it's the groovy power of the sun networking, blah, blah, blah. It's good. We can work with those kind of differences, That's possible to bridge. But at some level, this has to be an emotional connection for people. That's what really produces change when we get to it. There's the logo that we're using. It's half a sun to symbolize the fact that we're halfway there. We have the technology that we need. Now we need the political will to make use of it. So the very first thing we're doing, and you can actually already do this on the kind of beta website that's up at sunday.earth, all right? easy to remember. The very first task that we're having people doing, and tens of thousands of them have done it already, is just to complete that symbol. There's a good drawing tool there that lets people come up with all kinds of beautiful and fanciful ways. So by the time we launch, we'll have a crawl with tens of thousands of these images, sort of telling the story over and over and over again. And they really are spectacularly beautiful, and many of them, and they start to get at all the senses of possibility here. Not just around the climate crisis, but around the real liberatory potential that comes from the ability to produce your own energy on your Indian reservation, in your small rural community, wherever it is. Those are powerful, powerful changes that are possible, not just in the power supply, but in the power structure of the planet on which we live. And so we need people emotionally engaged in this work. Art and music will be an extremely important part of the storytelling. I have a book about all this coming out in midsummer, and the title I borrowed from George Harrison. It's called Here Comes the Sun. And as it turns out, that gentle and optimistic ballad is by far the most downloaded Beatles song in the world. Twice as many people listen to it every day as Hey Jude or Let It Be or anything else. And I think it's because it strikes some note that we badly need at this moment, some possibility of a kind of unifying group project that would transform. We're short on positive visions for the future right at the moment. We desperately need to do the work of playing defense against all the terrible things that are happening right now, but we also need to be able to play some offense, to offer a vision of what the world might look like if we did things right. And so that's what, in some way, this day will be about. There's Jane Fonda's contribution, which because many of you don't even know who she is, but ask an old person. And they will tell you that she's quite cool. So that's what we're up to. And in this context, the context that you're talking about, it's very much about, as you can tell, storytelling, putting out a vision of the world and fleshing it out. I think it's probably the most important story that there is at the moment. I think it's the only actual way that we can deal with the crisis that we're in the climate. But there are many other stories happening. We just need people to, for a day or two, tell this one story all at once. One of the challenges of movement building, especially among artists and storytellers, is that we all have our stories to tell. And that's excellent and important. And over time, taken together, they subtly shift the zeitgeist. But sometimes we have to come together and actually all tell the same story for a little while in order to give it enough heft to actually change things, all right? And we can see how that happens in, on the other side of this thing. If you get the entire storytelling apparatus of Twitter and Fox News and Donald Trump and whatever, then you have people who are, convinced that immigrants are eating cats and dogs or, whatever it is. And we see how that kind of heft and power drives change. So sometimes it is important for all of us to cease for the moment telling our own particular stories for a little while and join. People sometimes say, oh, you don't want to preach to the choir. It's a phrase you may have heard. Actually, you do want to preach to the choir because you want the choir singing the same hymn and singing it loudly enough to be heard. Okay? Sometimes that's really important. And right now, I think we're in one of those times. So I hope that at all your institutions and all your homes, you'll start right now thinking of what you can do on that day in September. Parades of EVs and e-bikes, getting every home in the in the town that has a solar panel to put a green lantern and a green light in the window that night. We're actually publicly launching this a week from Saturday at Old North Church in Boston, where up in Paul Revere's steeple, we're hanging a solar-powered green lantern. You know, at your institutions, that's the day to cut the ribbon on the new solar farm that you've been working on. But think creatively too. I was talking with our dear colleague at Middlebury not long ago, Crystal Brown, the great dance teacher in the world, trying to convince her that the time has come to choreograph a ballet for those solar panels up on rotating, that can rotate to follow the sun. The possibilities are endless as long as they all funnel in the same direction. This is one of these moments when storytelling might actually add up to more than the sum of its parts. And so I'm allowing myself, even amidst the almost hourly assault of terrible news at the moment, to feel a certain kind of possibility. It's been a long time in this country since we've had a kind of group project to work on. Arguably, the last one was the Apollo missions of the 1960s, which a few of us are able to remember with a sort of, wistful sense of how exciting that was. But that was a project about putting two people on another planet, and most of us just watched from the sidelines. This is a group project about bringing our star down to this Earth to allow it to power this place that we love. And it's a story where we don't know the outcome. That's what makes for good stories. But it's one where we can influence things in enormous ways. All right, I'm going to stop there. Many thanks. Frank, do we have enough time left for a question or two?
I think a question or two. We have, let's say,
fair enough.
4 minutes left.
Question, comment, critique, abuse, whatever you would like. Just raise your hand. I'll point to you, and you go on.
Hi, Bill. Mark Lichtenstein from the College of Environmental Science and Forestry, ESF. You know ESF?
Of course.
Anybody here from ESF?
Spent many happy hours up in the forest in Newcomb. So
There you go.
Yeah.
On behalf of my grandkids, the generations yet to come, the Biosphere, I want to thank you for all your work.
Kind of you. Thank you. Back at you.
So for, maybe the younger students here, we've had transitions like this in a civilization. Humans to ox, ox to horses, horses to wood, wood to coal, you get the gist. And during all those energy transitions, I know for a fact in some of those there were powerful forces that represented the previous energy source that stood in the way of the transition, but the transition still happened. So I just would like to get your perspective, looking back through civilization and history. Do you see these powerful forces, any different than those?
Yeah, so the only real difference here is time. If we had unlimited time to deal with this, this would not be an issue. Because over time and relatively rapidly, we're going to move in the right direction. Economics has its own powerful, erosive power that will get us where we need to go. Our problem's just time. Climate change is now happening in real time, and unless we can arrest it almost immediately, then the forces that we've unleashed will just overwhelm whatever comes next. The good news is that the most recent science indicates that if we stop putting more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, if we reached a net zero point, then temperature rise would actually stop. And this is relatively new science, and it's different from what we thought even 10 years ago. So that should give us some actual ray of hope and incentive for moving really fast. But at the moment, we're going in exactly the wrong direction. We got 2024 saw the single largest increase in CO2 in the atmosphere that we've ever recorded, 3.75 parts per million, almost 50% higher than what we've been seeing. And the reason, as far as we can tell, is that terrestrial carbon sinks, forests, are beginning to lose some of their ability to sequester carbon as forest fires, drought, things become more prevalent. So that's the issue here. Can we there was no particular time limit for going from, wood to coal. It could kind of play out over, but in this case, physics is, and this is, I know I've run over time, so this is this place to end. I mean, physics sets actual definable limits on what we can and can't do. We're used to thinking of kind of infinite possibility, and in certain ways that's a wonderful way to think. But it's also good to be reminded that on the particular planet where God situated us, we deal with certain laws of physics and chemistry that put certain limits on what we can and can't do. And we're now smack up against them. We're getting hit in the face by the results of our own arrogance and short-sightedness. And so that's why the possibility for shifting the story is so powerful and so beautiful. And I'm going to end on that word, beautiful. This is necessary for lots of reasons and useful for lots of reasons. But if we don't actually understand it as the beautiful, as reconnecting with the largest object in our universe and the one that we can't actually look at directly, only sense. Some of you lived in places where this time last year we were eagerly awaiting the eclipse of the sun. That was a great day. For one day, I was out on the Middlebury campus, and 1,500 students were there, and everybody put their phones down. It was overwhelming. It was spectacular. It was a reminder that we live on a planet in a solar system, in a universe. How cool is that? There we go. Thank you.
All right. All right, come here, before you go. We'll put our hats on together. I want to thank you for everything you've done. Sunday is beautiful. We will join you on Sunday. You said something that's powerful, and I want you to take away, and that is the hopefulness of the stories that we can tell. But that doesn't mean we don't also simultaneously tell the stories of urgency, the stories of heat and record and loss, the stories of confrontation that are out there. We have to tell all those stories. But connecting stories like that to the public is essential to give people, A, an idea of what's going on, B, a sense of what they can join, and C, and so importantly, a sense of hope. So Bill McKibben, you give us a sense of hope, and you're the best, and thank you so much. All right. Very quickly, because we've got to get out of here and get you all across the street. One, several thanks. First, to Middlebury College and Middlebury's unbelievable Conflict Transformation Collaborative for all the work that you've done and the collaboration you've done to make this possible. Two, for Kim, Aaron, Jamila, our students, Ashley, the production team, for making these past couple of days amazing. Kim, thank you. Incredible. Three, to our consortium schools, our students, our faculty, our provosts, and others who join us here today and are the leaders in what we're doing and are the leaders in the stories that are being told. I can think of no better example than our friends at SUNY ESF, who went down to Vieques, who made a commitment to that community, have told those stories. Others of you are doing at Rutgers, telling the stories of science, bringing those to the public. Middlebury, telling the stories of conflict and how we can transform it. We need to keep telling those stories, so thanks to all of you. Another round of applause for that. Okay, you're going to head across the street to the workshops. They're in the Student Center there. They're on the third floor. They're all on the third floor. That's where we had lunch yesterday. You can follow the Planet Forward staff in green shirts. Get your hats and sign up for our Adobe thing and get all that. You can go to the planetforwardsummit.org/workshops for your room assignments. That's all right there in the building across the street. Also, lunch and swag will be available in the room 308 over there after the workshops. We start right at 10:30, so you have 8 minutes to get over there. I'm going to say thank you again to everybody who's been here. ideas for what we can do, should do in the future, next summit, let us know, right? Write to us. If you're interested in being a Planet Forward correspondent, let us know. Find Kim, find Aaron. But now we stand up, we go out, we cross the street. Thanks for a great morning. And again, thanks to Bill McKibben. It was amazing.